Hello, and welcome back to my channel. Today, I have another true crime ASMR video for you. Last week, I had given you the opportunity to pick a topic, and Kimmy had recommended two interesting cases. So today, we will be covering one of them, which is the case of Jodi Huisentruit. Jodi was a Mason City news anchor who disappeared in the early morning of June 27th, 1995. As always, I will be adding this video to my True Crime ASMR series playlist. This is where you can find past and future videos in this series. Today, I have a beautiful snowfall for you to enjoy with this audio. Today is the very first major snowfall of the year in New York, which I am so happy it has finally fallen and stuck, for that matter. It's very odd for me as a New Yorker to not have snow on Christmas, let alone past January. So, I think snow has this very relaxing manner to it. It falls so delicately and provides this silence that is just so gentle and beautiful. So, I hope you enjoy this video, and now let's get into it. Jodi Huisentruit was born on June 5th, 1968. She was born and raised in Long Prairie, Minnesota, and was the youngest daughter of Maurice Huisentruit and Imogen Huisentruit. And if I am butchering this last name, I do apologize. Jodi was very active in her school growing up and excelled in golf. So much so that she won the state class A tournament along with her golf team in 1985 and 86. After graduating high school, she would go on to St. Cloud State University. This is where she studied mass communications and speech communication. Jodi would graduate from St. Cloud in 1990 with a bachelor's degree. Jodi's first job upon graduation actually wasn't in the journalism field at all. She took a job with Northwest Airlines, which was headquartered in Eagan, Minnesota. She later left that job to begin her broadcasting career with KGAN in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. She would go there as the station's Iowa City bureau chief. She then decided to go to KSAX in Alexandria before returning to Iowa once again for her position as a morning news anchor at KIMT in Mason City. It was here that Jodi would disappear. The day before her disappearance, Jodi had participated in a golf tournament. She then would go to hang out with her friend John Vansice, which we will get more into John later in this video. They would go to his house to watch a videotape from a birthday celebration that he had arranged for Jodi early that month. The next day, on June 27th, 1995, around 4:10 in the morning, the producer of KIMT would realized that her morning show anchor, Jody, had not shown up to report as scheduled before her telecast. Jody had been late a few times before, but always made it in for the 6 a.m. newscast. Amy Coons was the producer at KIMT, and she would call Jody's apartment to see if Jody was home. And much to her relief, Jody answered the phone and had stated she had just overslept and was on her way. Amy would then end the call and wait for Jody to come in. But by 6 a.m., Jody still had not arrived, and Amy had to fill in for her on the morning show. By 7 a.m., Jody still had not arrived, and Jody could not be reached. The KIMT staff and producers would call the police. Amy Coons would explain to investigators that she had just spoken to Jody that morning when Jody was at her apartment. This would be police's first stop. Upon arrival, it was immediately clear that something was wrong. Jody's car was still in the parking lot, and the scene insinuated a struggle. Many of her belongings and personal items were found scattered across the area, including a pair of her shoes, a hairdryer, hairspray, and earrings. Jody's her car keys were found, but the key was bent. They were also able to recover an unidentified partial palm print from her car and a single unidentified hair at the scene. These findings suggested foul play and escalated the original wellness check into a missing persons investigation. I will say that I am very impressed by how this case was treated early on. Most missing persons cases, police delay with adults, stating someone over 18 can leave on their own. However, they acted very quickly, which is so important for these cases because every minute counts. Police would then investigate Jody's apartment, and everything seemed normal. The only thing out of place was that the toilet seat was up, which led police to believe Jody had a male visitor. But no other evidence was found that anyone had been with Jody that morning. Amy had told police that she had woken up Jody when she called and that everything seemed normal during their brief conversation. This pointed police to focus on the area around the car, assuming that whatever happened did not occur until Jody had left the apartment. After securing the scene, police would begin to interview neighbors. Witnesses would state to hearing a scream coming from the parking lot of the building around the time Jody would have been leaving for work that morning. Though no one called the police, another witness stated that when he drove by the parking lot around 3:50 a.m., he saw a white van parked in Jody's parking lot with the headlights off and couldn't tell if the engine had been running. The witness identified the vehicle as a Ford Econoline, but did not get a plate number. The witness described the van as like the vans that are used by maintenance workers. This wasn't like a minivan, this was a work van. A neighbor who lived across the street from Jodi's complex also came forward and said she saw a light-colored van parked outside the building's entrance. And this would be between 4 and 4:30. Shortly after the man driving by saw it in the parking lot. So she said the sound of a slamming car door had woken her up. And that's when she looked out the window to see the van. She said as she fell back asleep, she heard another door slam. And when she awoke again, 2 hours later, the van was gone. She thinks the slamming sounds that woke her up may have been the rear doors of the van's hatch being closed. Both witnesses that had seen the van were both constantly seeing this parking lot. The first witness, his daily commute past Jodi's parking lot every morning at the same time. The lady, she had lived across the street, and both witnesses stated to have never seen this van in that parking lot before. After additional interviews, another witness came forward and said around 4:30 a.m. the morning prior to Jodi's disappearance, she had seen a young black man riding his bike outside Jodi's apartment while she was jogging, which she thought was strange for the time of morning. Don't understand why that would be strange, but anyway. He then began to ride his bike beside her as she jogged away from the building, which she found very unsettling. Then, the next morning, around 4:30 a.m., again, she was nearly hit by a car while jogging again in the same spot. The car's headlights were off, and it would have hit her had she not jumped back on the sidewalk. This witness jogged the same route past Jodi's building at the same time nearly every day and made it a point to mention both of these events as odd. The day after Jodi's disappearance, the FBI and the Iowa Department of Criminal Investigations joined the investigation. A statement was released saying officials suspect foul play, but that nothing concrete has been found and no one has been named as a suspect, despite over 100 interviews being conducted. Police began attempting to retrace Jodi's steps in the days leading up to her disappearance. 4 days before she had went missing on June 23rd, 1995, Jodi and a group of friends visited Iowa City. Jodi's friend, John Vansice, was the driver for the trip. On June 25th, the group returned home, and neighbors reported hearing a man enter the apartment complex around 4 p.m. who repeatedly pounded on Jodi's door, saying, "I know you're in there, and come out." But neighbors said Jodi had recently bought herself a new car, and this car wasn't in the parking lot. So they all concluded Jodi must not have been home. No one was able to identify this man. The day before her disappearance, on June 26th, Jodi had played in a golf tournament, then went to go see her friend John, see that birthday videotape. She had returned home by 10 p.m. This led investigators to peg John as the last person to see Jodi alive. John became police's first person of interest. John and Jodi had met in October of 1994 because they lived in the same apartment building at the time. At the beginning of March in 1995, Vansice moved out of the complex and had bought a duplex where he had moved in. Vansice began buying Jodi unsolicited gifts and even named a boat that he had bought after her. It was then alleged that in March of 1995, Vansice had actually pushed apart Jodi and a man named Billy Bruin, who were dancing together at a bar. Vansice would tell Billy that Jodi is my girl. Now, interestingly enough, although this has never been proven to be linked to this case, I found it very interesting. This same man that John had pushed away from Jodi, Billy Bruin, was found shot to death in his home in Mason City in April of 1995. Now, officials originally ruled his death as suicide, but the cause was changed to undetermined after finding new evidence to suggest a struggle had taken place. Bruin had also bought a very fancy tractor and proposed to his girlfriend 2 days before his death, which, I'm just saying, this allegedly happened in March, that he was dancing with Jodi, and he just died in April. How long was he with his girlfriend if he was dancing with Jodi a month or so before? Like, I don't know, different times back then, I guess, because I feel like people met and got married, like, right away back then. Now, the case of Bruin went cold, and no connections to Jodi's case have been made. But again, just very interesting that this all happens so close together. It was uncovered that in October 1994, Jodi filed a police report stating that she was being followed by a white pickup truck. From what I could find, this truck was never identified. There's also an incident that occurred in the weeks leading up to Jodi's abduction. There was a report of an unidentified man on a bike following her while she was walking, which ties back to our witness that had this happen to her as well. Soon after Jodi went missing, a martial arts instructor came forward and said that Jodi had been a student in a self-defense class. When asked the reason for taking the class, Jodi said she had an incident a few months prior that she was not comfortable with, but did not elaborate further. She also reportedly told friends she thought she might be being followed. Some speculate that these comments may stem from the pickup truck incident, the bike incident, or possibly another incident. She never really discussed a lot of this with anyone, which is interesting. This girl is in telecommunications, but she's not talking about events with herself. Very interesting. This led to police's interest in John Vansice to increase, and I'm going to do a quick summary so we're not too lost here. There's a lot of information that I'm throwing at you. So, from beginning, a year before she went missing in 1994, Jodi filed a police report that she had been being followed by a white pickup truck. Jodi then meets John Vansice at their apartment complex in October 1994, 8 months before she goes missing. In March of 95, Vansice moves out of this complex, and the two remain in contact. At some point around this time, Vansice shoves Billy Pruitt away from Jody at a bar and calls her his girl. On April 4th, Billy is found dead. At some point around this time, as well, Jody was followed by both the unidentified black pickup and the unidentified man in separate instances. In May or June, Vansice begins buying Jody unsolicited gifts and names his boat after her. On June 23rd, Jody and a group of friends that included Vansice leave to visit Iowa City, returning on the 25th. On June 26th, Jody plays a golf tournament, visits Vansice, and comes home. She's home around 10, and at 4 a.m. the morning of June 27th, her producer, Amy Coons, speaks with Jody on the phone, and sometime between that call and the police arriving at her apartment, a bit after 7 a.m., Jody is gone. So, after interviewing John had told police he was the last person to see Jody alive. He was fine saying that. This wasn't deduced by police alone. John stated it. So, police interviewed friends of John, one being LaDonna Woodford, who he frequently went on walks with in the morning. LaDonna had called John on his home landline around 6 a.m., to which he answered. She showed up at his house a bit after this. When she knocked, Vansice told her to give him a minute, so she waited on the porch. The friend reported that he did not come out for around 20 minutes, and when they finally took their walk, he talked about Jody the whole time. Homie was obsessed. After his meeting with LaDonna, John went to a local gas station to meet with a friend and had breakfast around 7 a.m. The friend informed Vansice that Jody wasn't on the news that morning, like usual, and said they should go check on her, to which Vansice replied, "Jody's gone." Vansice later says this comment referred to him also not seeing her on the morning newscast, but bizarre. At 7:20 a.m., Vansice found the KIMT station looking for Jody, and when he was told she wasn't there, he and 2 other men arrived at Jody's apartment while police were still on the scene. Vansice told police there that she had been at his home the night prior, and after his statement, police had him bring the tape of Jody's birthday party to the station and questioned him for the first time. Since June 27th, Vansice has been questioned multiple times, but has never been named an official suspect. To this day, he has only been called a person of interest. He also drove a blue van at the time, which a lot of people speculated with that white van being one of the only leads in the case. People have gone down a massive rabbit hole on this because of those 2 van witnesses. But John's van was not a work van, and it was blue. The van he owns doesn't even come close to the descriptions. It was also ruled out by police shortly after Jody goes missing. Vansice was kept as person of interest status, and police had to turn to other avenues to try and find Jody. In doing this, police turned their attention to Tony Jackson. He was a 21-year-old who lived 2 blocks from the KIMT station. Jackson is a serial rapist and has a history of violence against women, and is currently serving a life sentence in Minnesota for the rapes of 3 women. Many believe that his residence being so close to the station could have given him an opportunity to see and take interest in Jodi and watch her to know her patterns. It is speculated that Jackson could have been the young black man seen by the jogger outside Jodi's apartment in the morning before she went missing, as well as a man on the bike who followed Jodi in the weeks before her abduction. These 2 things have never been corroborated. Police did, however, name Jackson another person of interest. Jackson denies the claims that he had anything to do with Jodi's case, saying he had never even seen her in person. But a former friend of Jackson's says that Jackson did. In fact, know Jodi and stated he watched him approach and talk to her at a bar where she was a regular. That bar where she saw Billy. The friend claims that Jackson had specifically asked if they could go to the bar because he knew Jodi would be there. While this story could never be confirmed, the friend said he had a gut feeling that Jackson is responsible for the crime due to the other offenses he committed later in life and is now serving prison time for. So he thinks that Jodi was his first victim. An unnamed man was also questioned as a person of interest shortly after Jodi disappeared, but was never named as a suspect. This man was arrested 5 months later for stalking a television anchor woman in St. Louis Park, Minnesota. Investigators maintain that despite his arrest, he is not a suspect in Jodi's case. A month after Jodi went missing, police had interviewed over 800 people, but there were still no official suspects named, and searches in Mason City and the surrounding area had not provided any promising leads. In September 1995, 2 months after Jodi's disappearance, the Huisentruit family hired 2 private investigators from Minneapolis, who then enlisted the help of another PI from Omaha, Nebraska. Together, these 3 appeared on numerous television shows on behalf of the family, including America's Most Wanted and Unsolved Mysteries. These appearances generated hundreds of leads, but none that ever brought investigators any closer to finding Jodi. In November, 4 months after Jodi went missing, the Huisentruit family went to LA to appear on the pilot episode of a television show called Psychic Detectives. The show in itself seems a bit strange, but the premise is that family members would visit the show's psychics, and the psychics would provide information about the case using their abilities. On the show, the psychics told the family that Jodi's abductor was someone who saw her on TV and became obsessed. Investigators have never found evidence to corroborate this theory. By the 6th month mark in December, the reward for information leading to an arrest in Jodi's case scaled to $34,000. KIMT staff continued to fill in for her on the morning news program, and the station hadn't hired anyone new to replace her, leaving her listed internally as on leave. In May 1996, over 100 volunteers swept a large area of northeast Cerro Gordo County looking for anything suspicious and flagging it for authorities. Unfortunately, many places were flagged and no leads were generated from the search. At this point, the case goes cold. Jodi was declared legally dead in May 2001, despite her body never being found. She remains missing to this day in 2005. As the 10-year anniversary of Jodi's disappearance approached, there was another flood of coverage for the case in the media, and more leads generated, but still nothing led to Jodi. The case remained cold for years, and it would until 2008, when an unlikely package caused it to heat up in a very major way. In June of 2008, the Mason City Globe-Gazette received photocopies of Jodi's 84-page personal journal in a large envelope with no return address. The only clue as to who it came from was a postmark from Waterloo, Iowa, a city an hour and a half away from Mason City. The journal had been in the possession of police since 1995, when the investigation began. So when the newspaper reported the package, investigators looked at it as a possible break in the case. Within days, police announced that the sender had come forward and was identified as the wife of a former Mason City police chief, though not the same chief who oversaw Jodi's case. This was unconfirmed. It's believed that the woman made the photocopies when her husband had brought the journal home to analyze it. No motive was ever given as to why she sent the package. This seems like a cover-up to me. Anyway, Frank Stearns, who was police chief in Mason City at the time of Jodi's disappearance, underwent scrutiny in 2011 when a former Mason City officer claimed Stearns and two other officials had been involved in the disappearance of Jodi, and that this was a subsequent cover-up. Interesting. Stearns retired amid this scrutiny, and an investigation into him did not validate the claims by the former officer. So what if it was actually Stearns' wife that sent in this photocopy? Or someone who had known that Frank Stearns had been involved and sent it in to try and point them in the right direction. In December 2016, retiring legislator John Kuwicker discussed his experience working with the case. At the time of Jodi's disappearance, he was a member of the Iowa State House Public Safety Committee. Kuwicker went as far as suggesting a cover-up had taken place by Mason City officials. He speculated this was the reason the case had never been solved. Currently, there is no evidence of a cover-up available to the public, but obviously, if there was a cover-up, there would not be. Kuwicker's comments caused people to speculate even further about former police chief Stearns and his possible involvement in either the crime or a possible cover-up. Then in May 2017, police served John Vansice, now married and living in Arizona, with a search warrant for GPS data from his 2 vehicles. Records from this search warrant are sealed. He was also required to provide finger and palm prints to police and was subpoenaed to testify in front of a grand jury regarding the case. These records are also sealed. On New Year's Eve, 2019, just 30 minutes before the clock struck midnight, 2 adults dressed in all black were seen defacing a billboard in Mason City with Jody's picture that read, "Someone knows something. Is it you?" The vandals were seen by numerous passing cars during the act, and many other drivers saw their work after they were finished. Large spray-painted words under the original message on the billboard read, "Frank Stearns, Machine Shed." This prompted people to once again look into Stearns, who had already been investigated and cleared by police back in 2011, when those first allegations of his involvement surfaced. As of today, Jody has never been found, and the case is still being actively investigated 27 years later by the FBI, Iowa Division of Criminal Investigations, Mason City Police, and private investigators. Now, that is the case of Jodi Huisentruit. As far as my thoughts, I don't believe John Vansice is at fault here. I don't believe Tony Jackson is either. I think it was very unfortunate that all this happened to Jody by all of these men. I think it could be plausible it was Jackson, but I don't. With all this stuff about the police having a possible cover-up, there's a reason why Frank Stearns retired, okay? If you didn't do anything, you would stand your ground. He was in the police force, you know? Although Jackson did match the description of the biker in both those situations. He was never officially identified as being the biker, but I'm not sure why they didn't do a photo lineup or something with the witness from the morning that was jogging. There's just a lot of things that are possible because the fact that Billy Pruin was murdered, it had to have been someone who also went to that bar. I can't believe that they haven't looked into both of these. It could also have been someone who was just obsessed with Jody. I think it's possible. I think that bar and the murder of Billy hold a lot of answers. I do believe whoever killed Billy was responsible for the obvious murder of Jody. I don't think she is missing anymore, which breaks my heart. That she's out there somewhere and we haven't found her yet. I believe everyone should have a choice in where they are laid to rest. I feel like the respect for the dead is a high priority, and it isn't fair that this happened, but it is even more heartbreaking that she never had a choice for her ultimate resting place. And that's just, I don't want to know how her family feels, because I can just imagine how heartbreaking it is to just want to bring your family member to a safe and respected place to rest. Someone took so many choices and possibilities in life away from Jody, and I just hope that in the future this case is solved and justice is served and Jody is given a chance to rest in peace. I ultimately do think it was Stearns. I really do. Or maybe he knew it could have been John and Stearns just covered it up because John very obviously has money and he didn't even stay in Arizona, in Iowa. He moved to Arizona. That's a possibility too. I could brainstorm on what actually happened for about a while. We'd be here for a minute. But I would love to know your thoughts on this case in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video and found it informative and relaxing. Thank you, Kimmy, for suggesting this case. This was a case that I was not familiar with, and I'm happy to have covered it and hopefully help with putting this case out there. Jodi deserves to be heard. If you have any suggestions for future topics or just want to stop by to say hello, leave